به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن سيدنا ومولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي رب زدني علما رب زدني علما رب زدني علما رب يسر ولا تعسر وتممه لنا بالخير وبك نستعين يا فتاح يا فتاح يا فتاح. Amma ba'd. Honorable brethren, respected elders, fellow friends, youth, brothers and sisters, we initiate the gathering like we initiate every action of ours with the praise of the Almighty Allah Ta'ala, who is the only one deserving of all of our praise, who is the only one that is deserving of all of our worship, and who is the only one that is deserving of all of our glorification. And we send salutations upon His noble Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, who is the seal of all prophets, who is the perfect example for all of us to follow. May Allah Ta'ala allow us to live our life in accordance to His. Ameen Ya Rabbil Alameen. We will be continuing our discussion from last week, as we mentioned, that in the upcoming weeks we will be discussing how to gear up for the month of Ramadan. Last week we discussed in a nutshell is how to train for the month of Ramadan before it proceeds. And for that we gave the example of the Ironman triathlon. In a nutshell, basically stating how if we do not start preparing for the month now, then it becomes a bit difficult to kind of execute the game plan that you have when the month of Ramadan comes. So if you don't start preparing for it now, then you kind of run out of gas when the month of Ramadan comes. So to start training for that now was pretty much what we discussed last week. Continuing the same theme of preparing for the month of Ramadan this week, we will be discussing a few points that we should adhere to in the month of Ramadan. A few guidelines, a few steps that will help us when the month of Ramadan actually comes. Now, it's always easy for all of us that whenever we hear a certain talk, a certain lecture that takes place, that our ambition now suddenly rises and now we want to become good. So we go to a lecture, we go to a Jum'ah Khutbah and we hear the Shaykh or we hear the Imam say a certain thing or make a certain point, and now our Iman is at a higher level than it was before. Now we want to start doing good, we want to start making amal on that lecture, and we want to inculcate that talk in our life. But now sometimes what happens is when we hear this talk, we don't really know how to pair it or incorporate it in our practical lives. So we hear that yes, we're supposed to pray 5 times a day, yeah, we're supposed to do this, X, Y, and Z, but to actually incorporate it within our lives, it gets a bit difficult. So today we'll discuss the different acts of worship that we're supposed to do in the month of Ramadan, the different goals that all of us have, the unanimous goals that all of us share, how we can incorporate them in our practical lives once the month of Ramadan comes. Did we all get that? The different goals, the common goals that all of us have, for all the different people that are here, how can we incorporate them in our daily lives? And before we get into the different acts of worship, the method that we'll be using is what I like to call the 3-step guideline. Okay? The 3-step guideline is basically anytime you look at any act of worship, the first thing that we will discuss is how long does it take? How time consuming is that specific action? That's the first. The second step that we will discuss is the technique to actually complete that act. So now once you've understood how long it takes to do this act of worship, now to actually execute that game plan, that's the second step. And if for some reason one can't do the second step, then the third step is that the person is required to just do the bare minimum. Okay? So the first is how much of your time is this amal going to consume? The second is the technique to actually execute. And the third is the bare minimum if one cannot do the first two. Khair, there's a lot to discuss. Let's jump right into the discussion. The first act of worship that all of us try our best to incorporate in our lives is what? Salah. To pray 5 times a day, every single day. So what was the first step that we said? Time commitment. How long does it take? How much time does salah really consume in our practical lives? Now, something that I myself am guilty of, and I'm sure a lot of us are guilty of as well, is that when we describe salah, when we describe the prayer, we say that, man, it only takes about 4 to 5 minutes in our day. Correct? I've said this a lot myself, and I'm sure I've heard a lot of people say this as well, that salah, why is it so hard for us to pray? It only takes 5 minutes a day anyway, and then you multiply that by 5, and oh man, 25 minutes, you can't spare 25 minutes in your time? Or fine, let's throw in an extra 5 minutes just to kind of round up. 30 minutes in your day, you can't take out of your time. Now see, there's a bit of a contention when you say this. Because salah, it doesn't really only take 5 minutes. Even though we say that as a form of encouragement, there's so much more to salah than meets the eye. There's the actual preliminary steps that lead to salah, which is the wudu, right? When you make the wudu, to actually ponder over all of the actions of wudu. When you're washing your face, to wash them 3 times, to make amal upon the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, to start from the right, and to do the entire wudu the same way the Prophet ﷺ did. Okay, so that's the first step. We haven't even started salah. Then now when you get into the masjid or the musalla or wherever you're about to pray, then you have to pray the sunnah, the sunan. Dhuhr has 4 sunnah, Maghrib has 2, and so on and so forth. Now that's time consuming all within itself. And now the fard comes. Now the person will start rendering out his fard. And after his fard, he'll sit down and he'll make dua. So now when we talk about salah, this entire cycle is what we're referring to. It's not just the mere praying, the up and down motion that we kind of confine it to. It's the preliminary steps all the way leading to the dua. That's what we talk about when we say salah. So all of us have this ambition that yes, we have to start praying 5 times a day. But in reality, it's not really 5 minutes that we're looking at. We're talking about 15 to 20 minutes, okay? And if you're at home, then we're talking about 30 minutes. So that's the time commitment that we'll be putting in. Now, as far as having a technique to execute the game plan. Now, all of us in the month of Ramadan will have our different occupations. Some of us will have to go to work. Some of us will have to go to school. But to find some time, so when you go to school and you go to work, you're bound to at least pray 1 salah at work, correct? You're bound to pray Dhuhr, and for some people that might transition over to Asr as well. So you will be praying some prayer in your workplace or your school. Now the time that you take out in your workplace or your school, it does not necessarily have to be the same amount of time that you do at home, per se. So if you're doing 15 or 10 minutes at work or 15 minutes at work, then try to double that time when you're at home. So, and it starts from now. Go to your workplace, find a place where you can start praying, find a place where it's okay for you to take out that 10 minutes in your time. Start going up to your boss and your colleagues and let them know that, listen man, Ramadan is coming, say no joke, I got to start preparing from now. And you have to start making those steps from now to find a place where you can pray, to kind of set the environment up so that when Ramadan comes, you don't start looking for those things when the month approaches. Are we all following along? So that's the technique to actually execute. Now there's the bare minimum. The bare minimum is that if we can't take out, say, 20 minutes or 25 minutes or even 30 minutes in our time, then the bare minimum at least someone can do is make sure you pray. Make sure that regardless of the circumstance that you will try your utmost best to pray. And for some of us that might be extremely difficult all within itself, because some of us weren't praying, which is totally fine. Some of us weren't praying, so now to transition from no salah to 5 salah altogether is a very, very big step. And may Allah make it easy for all of us, ameen. But to make that big jump at times, it's probably not the easiest thing to do. But just at least try to do that bare minimum. Try to at least hit that mark. Because once you've hit that mark and you've incorporated that in your life, then inshallah you'll see the big change that can take place in your life. You know, there's just one point that came to my mind. It's so ironic that we say that a person who prays 5 times a day, he's considered a great Muslim, correct? Someone who prays 5 times a day, will say that person is really on his deen. That person's really doing something correct. He's praying 5 times a day. Whereas when we actually look at what we're taught, the bare minimum to even be a Muslim or a good Muslim is that you have to pray 5 times a day. So we know where we are and we know where we're supposed to be. We're all following along? So even though we consider someone who prays 5 times a day as a great Muslim, even though that is a very commendable action, that's still just the bare minimum that's required from us. So the 3 steps that we went through were time commitment, that it should take about 10 to 15 minutes at work or at school, and about 30 minutes when you're at home. In order to actually complete the task, you need to start preparing for now. You need to start preparing from now. That find ways that you can start incorporating salah in your workplaces as well as your schools. And the last is the bare minimum. If you can't do the first 2, then at least, sometimes certain situations arise, life throws curveballs, you never know what you're going to expect. So with that being said, if a situation comes up, then at least make sure the bare minimum is complete. Now going on to the second amal and the second act of worship. The second act of worship that we will all be engaging in is the completion of the Quran. Or in other words, the recitation of the Noble Quran. Now, one benchmark that all of us should keep from now is that when the month of Ramadan comes, I will try my best. That doesn't matter what happens, I will try my utmost best that I will finish an entire Quran. May Allah give us all the ability to do so. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. That we will finish an entire Quran. Okay, that's the benchmark that we're setting. Now, again, the first step, time commitment. How long does it take for someone to recite 1 juz a day? Because if you want to finish the entire Quran, obviously you're going to have to keep a certain pace. So now that depends on the person. That depends on your own individual self. How long do you take to recite 1 juz? Now, if you start preparing from now, what that will allow you to do is pick up your pace in order to recite a bit quicker when the month of Ramadan comes. So on average, let's say it can take a person from 20 minutes to upwards to 2 hours to finish 1 juz. Okay? So that's the time commitment that we're already expecting. As far as finding a technique to complete this, now there's various ways we can go about this. So let's kind of pay attention. The first is the 1 juz daily method. Now the most simple way to go about this is that someone, every single day, he dedicates some time in his day to recite 1 juz. And now when I talk about reciting Quran, I'm referring to the 15-line Mus'haf, by the way. Okay? That has 20 pages total. And if you recite, 1 page, or 5 pages rather, then you do that 4 times in a day, that's 20 pages. That's your entire juz. Now, that's the first method, that one person sits down and every single day he recites 1 juz. Now there's 2 ways someone can do that. Either you can sit one shot, in one sitting, you recite the entire juz. So after Fajr, for example, Ibrahim sits down and he recites the entire Alif Lam Mim, 1 sitting. Gets it over with, then he goes about his day. Or the second method that someone can use is what Umar does, is he'll recite 5 pages after Fajr, he'll recite 5 pages after Dhuhr, he'll recite 5 pages after Asr, and he'll recite 5 pages for say before he goes to sleep. Now he has his entire juz complete, and he did it in accordance to his day. So it might have been a bit difficult for him to recite it in 1 sitting. So what he did was he constructively found ways where he can slot in times to recite that 1 juz. Now that was the first method, the 1 juz daily method. The second method is the i'tikaf method. It's that you devote some time in your day to sit in the masjid and to make sure that juz finishes. Now whatever time that might be, come a little before iftar, or come a little before tarawih. A lot of us like to sit at home, we don't really do much. So as soon as you finish iftar, come sit in the masjid and make sure that juz gets recited. So that's the second method. So the first is the 1 juz daily, which has 2 steps to it. Either you do it in 1 sitting, or you do it in intervals. Or the second is that you do the i'tikaf method, which you come to the masjid and you devote some time in your day to recite that 1 juz. And the last, I like to call it the energy saver mode, right? It's the Energizer Bunny. So it says, you try your best to recite that 1 juz, but if you can't do it, don't let that be a reason to not recite at all. Just because you can't complete the benchmark that you've set for yourself, never let that be a hindrance for you to not recite at all. So if you can't, recite 1 juz, then recite a couple of pages, that's fine. But make sure that it's a steady pace and you keep it throughout the entire month. And then you have the bare minimum, which is that if you can't recite a juz, if you can't recite half a juz, then at least make sure that 1 page is recited every single day. At least one page every single day is recited, and inshallah Allah Ta'ala will allow you progressively to get better and better as the days go by. So that's two acts of worship that we've discussed. The first one was salah, and the second one was the recitation of the Quran. The next one is the night tarawih. Now this one's a bit difficult. You've spent the entire day, you were at work, you were at school, you took your classes, you did whatever you needed to do, and then you fasted the entire day, you didn't eat anything, and now all of a sudden you filled yourself up all the way till your throat, and now you have to come for tarawih. It's like a never-ending cycle, right? Like literally one thing after another. Now tarawih is something which can be extremely difficult. Time commitment, roughly about 1 to 2 hours depending on whoever's reciting, okay? Now as far as a technique to complete, now this is something that can help us a long way if we pay attention. Now, some of us stay for 8, some of us stay for 20. That discussion is not for this panel. That's a separate discussion altogether. However many raka'ah you stay for that many, but make it easy on yourself. Start preparing for now. How do you do that? The first thing is, start letting your body get used to standing up. Ramadan's a perfect time to realize how out of shape we are, right? Start standing up and start letting your body get used to, the extended periods of time. Because think about it. Now, you've gone through so many days or the entire year, right? And we haven't stood for that extended period of time. Now, all of a sudden, you put your body through such an agonizing time period by making yourself stand for that long. Your body is an amana at the end of the day, right? It's a trust given to us by Allah. So the more you prepare it and the more you get your engine moving, the easier it will be. So now start preparing yourself for that extended period where you will stand. The second is, before you come for tarawih, get a coffee or drink some chai or drink some tea. Get your mind and your body ready. I remember growing up, this was something which was very common, a common practice that my father had. That every time before tarawih used to start, there was about like an hour left, 45 minutes. He used to just zone out, just sit in the living room, and he used to have his teacup in his hand, and he used to just enjoy his tea. Nobody should disturb him that time, right? This is my time and solely for me because Tarawih's ahead, so I got to prepare. So sit down, give some time to yourself. It's going to be a tough month if we're trying to achieve the best that we can be, right? So if that's the benchmark that we have, then you have to take things step by step. And the third is ease up on the iftar, right? Did we all get that? Ease up on the iftar. You ever pray Tarawih and the person next to you burps so loud that you can literally tell what that person had for iftar? I know I'm not the only person. That you have so much throughout the day that you literally, there's like no point in fasting, that you make up for all those hours that you stayed hungry, you make up for it in the 45 minutes that you have iftar. And we like to make these resolutions that, I'm going to lose, right? Ali goes up to Ibrahim, for example, and he says, Ibrahim, this is the year, man. I'm going to lose 10 pounds in the month of Ramadan, right? And Aisha goes to Fatima and she says, girl, wedding season's coming, I'm going to lose 10 pounds. And what ends up happening, both Ali and Fatima gain like 15 pounds. So ease up on the iftar. Take it easy on yourself, right? To fill yourself up is not something which is ideal, and it's something which is extremely discouraged. So the third act that we discussed is the nightly tarawih. So the first was salah, the second one was the recitation of the Quran, and the third was the nightly tarawih. Moving forward, the fourth, something which I think is extremely important, and words cannot do justice as to how important this point really is. The fourth is the time that you dedicate with your family. Did we get that? The time that you dedicate to spend with your family. Now, when you come back from work and you haven't eaten all day, and the hours are extremely long, and the weather is extremely hot, and you come home and you see your children running around, what's the first thing that crosses your mind? Anger, rage, and you just want to just cut off from everybody. And you're human, that's totally fine. And for the kids that go to school, that's totally fine. You have your responsibilities. Sometimes you kind of want to just take time to yourself. You're allowed to do that. But make sure that some part of the day is designated to your family. For the fathers that are sitting here, make sure you sit down with your kids. Ask them how their days are going. Ask them what they're learning in school. For the mothers that are here, do the same. Sit down with your family members. For the kids that are here, make sure you sit with your parents, you sit with your brothers and your sisters, and create that environment in your house where everyone has this sense of love, right? And everyone knows what's going on. You know, it's so ironic with family especially, that when you're away from them, you miss them so much, right? You wish you could be with them. Like, I'm away from my family right now. Oh man, I wish I could spend my entire day with them. But then 1 or 2 days go by and then you're just like, man, I can't wait to leave the house, right? So especially in the month of Ramadan, try your best to spend time with your family, devote some slot in your day to sit with your family. Now, time commitment, it really just depends on the person's circumstances. It depends on your occupation and all the responsibilities that you have. So there's no really set time that you have that you're going to sit with your family. As far as a technique to complete, there's a few steps that we have over here. The first is when you sit with your family, the first day, ask them what they would look forward to throughout the month of Ramadan. So if you have kids, for example, ask them what they would like to hear from you. What kind of stories can you share with them? The stories of the prophets, right? The stories of the Anbiya, the stories of the messengers. So start sharing with them. Use this as a panel to give them da'wah. Use this as a panel to bring them closer to Islam. Because it's the month of Ramadan. Everybody's heart is soft. Right? Shaitan's locked up, so you can't use that as an excuse anymore. So now you have all this liberty to go ahead and work with your family. So we're quick to always say that, yeah, our families have X, Y, and Z as problems, but if we can't go ahead and focus on those problems in this month, then throughout the year it gets extremely difficult to do that. So set some time to sit with your family. And the bare minimum is that at least half hour in your day you set that time out with your family. Sit for that half hour and isolate yourself. And one really important point that I forgot to mention. Make sure that you limit your usage, not only yourself, but your entire family, of social media and the different electronics that you have in your house. Phones, iPads, laptops, anything that you have, try your best to kind of wean off of it. We use it so much that subconsciously, I myself am guilty of this, that you'll have 5, 6 people in one room, and you'll be talking to someone who's not even in the room on your phone. So try your best to kind of limit that. So when you're sitting with your kids or your family members, try your best, everybody puts their phones to the side, and we're just here to talk. We're just here to socialize. So that's what we're referring to when we say family time. So what were the first 4 ibadat that we said? Number 1 was salah. Number 2 was the recitation of the Quran. Number 3 was the tarawih. And number 4 was that you set some time out for your family. The last but not least, of course, is i'tikaf. Now this i'tikaf can either have its shari'i meaning, which is that the last 10 days you actually stay in the masjid. That's one meaning of it. Or that you set some time in your day to actually sit in the masjid by yourself. Every single day. So the month of Ramadan comes and it starts. So now I'll set some time in my day that I will just come sit in the masjid and I will just do the different acts of worship that I'm supposed to be doing. Spend some time in the masjid. Bring a book. Start reading whatever you need to read in the masjid. MashaAllah, there was this one brother, the name is slipping me right now, but he comes every Sunday and he just sits here. He does his homework. He comes with his book bag, comes with his computer. He just does what he needs to do and then he leaves. Now, what better place can you offer a person than the masjid? And now you're developing a connection with the masjid as well as fulfilling your responsibilities. So allocate some time in the day to come and sit in the masjid. Since time is short, we'll just quickly recap for the brothers and sisters that came a bit late, and we'll finish off. We were continuing our discussions about gearing up for the month of Ramadan. As the month of Ramadan is rapidly approaching us, we said the next few weeks we will solely discuss how to prepare for this month of Ramadan. Last week we discussed that's extremely important for us to start doing our acts of worship from now. So start fasting from now, try getting on your praying habits from now, and start incorporating that life from now. That's what we discussed last week. This week we kind of continued that same conversation, and we discussed the 3-step method to incorporate these acts of ibadah into our life. The first step that we had was time commitment. How long does it take for this ibadah to render out this act of worship? The second was after finding out how long it takes to actually complete that action. And the last was that if you cannot complete that action in its totality, then at least make sure that you do the bare minimum. We ask that Allah Ta'ala gives us all the ability to act upon whatever has been said. We ask that Allah Ta'ala, with the blessing of this Mubarak day, that He forgives all of our sins. Anyone who's going through a difficult time, we ask that Allah Ta'ala uplift their difficulty. Anyone who is sick, not only in our community, but the ummah at large, we ask that Allah Ta'ala grant them shifa'i kamila. And anyone who was with us, and now Allah Ta'ala has taken them away, and they have passed away, we ask that Allah Ta'ala forgive all of their sins. We ask Allah Ta'ala take away and uplift the punishment of the grave, and that Allah Ta'ala admit them into paradise. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. Wa akhiru da'wana, and alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.